All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite time of year. It's the time where Highside, Lowside comes back with yet another episode.
That is correct. That is Spurgeon Dunbar. My name is Zack. Of course, we are your hosts of Highside, Lowside, and we're very excited to bring you yet another episode. 'Tis the season, as Spurgeon said. I don't actually know if it's close enough to the holidays when you're listening to this for 'tis the season to make any sense at all, but it's probably cold when this episode is coming out. So unless you're in Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or something, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it's probably cold. And for the rest of you, we're very sorry.
Yeah, except for you're in Southern California where it's probably like a balmy 70 degrees right now, and you're sitting in like a winter jacket, bundled up like it's actually cold. For those of us in the reality of the Northeast and everywhere above, the line that we draw right across the middle of the country, it's cold out. And so we are going to spend this episode kind of regaling the audience with tales of stupid things we've done in cold weather, rides that we've taken, situations that we've gotten ourselves into. And we're just going to do it, the two of us. We have no other guest for this special episode.
Correct, Mundo. So it's Spurgeon and Zack, a cold weather riding duet, if you will. And we'll do one, about summer riding at some point. So don't worry. We'll cover that as well. But I suppose jumping right into it, before we totally dive in to this topic, we should remind you to please go to Apple iTunes and leave us a review. We know that it's a pain in the butt. We don't like writing reviews either. We are Yelp lurkers ourselves, so
are you?
We get it.
You lurk on Yelp? That's what you do?
Yeah, I use Yelp to find out if I like a restaurant or not, but I never leave a review. I'm a bad person. What can I say? I'm crummy.
Did you know that when Yelp was created, I listened to a podcast about this. That's how I know it's true. When Yelp was created, they actually didn't have the review feature in it. It was something that they added at the last minute, and it's what Yelp became known for. So could you imagine Yelp before that?
No, I cannot. What was it designed for if not leaving reviews?
Finding places. Like, it was kind of like a Yellow Pages type thing, I believe. Like, you could write.
Did you even pay attention to that podcast, to be honest?
I did, but it was a while ago. I think it was like, so you could give information about your establishment, and you could check in and like see like, oh, this is what, Bill's Barbecue is offering for a special today, or this is what you or like read about. Yeah. Good
for Groups has kids meals, that kind of thing. But there were no reviews. They literally
thought like no one is going to want to review. Like their whole point was like, no one's going to want to leave a review for somebody else. No one's going to take the time to do that. And now 10 years later or 5 years later or whatever it's been, our entire society is all about telling other people what we think about them. I mean, look at the comments underneath this podcast.
Well, that is very apropos. Thank you, Spurgeon, for the excellent segue to Apple iTunes, because we would love to hear what you think of this show, because it'll help make us, better at it, hopefully. And it also helps other people find this show. So if you like it or don't like it, please tell us and the world why.
And if you do this for us, as a thank you, we're going to be randomly picking out reviews and sending out free Highside, Lowside t-shirts. We now have an official Highside, Lowside t-shirt. If you don't get picked for leaving a review, we encourage you to buy one and wear it with pride. But I am here to let you know that today's winner, I'm going to dramatically turn the page.
Love it.
Is Promark5761, who wrote a review saying, "It's great to listen to on the way to work with headphones in when I'm ignoring my coworkers. Thank you for keeping my ear holes entertained." So thank you to Promark5761. We are glad that we could help you ignore your coworkers. Shoot us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com and give us your information, and we will send you a free t-shirt.
Congratulations to Promark, and many, many thank yous from the staff of Highside, Lowside. This is normally where we introduce a guest, but no one wanted to hang out with us and talk about this particular topic. So it's just me and Spurgy Doo talking about riding in inclement weather. So usually, sometimes they say like, what have you been riding and what have you been up to? So it's getting cold in Philly, right? This time of year.
It's been cold in Philly.
And you just showed me a picture the other day of riding up a creek when it was like 34 degrees out,
that
right?
that was actually probably a month and a half ago now. It was the beginning of, it was the end of October. It was October 3rd. It was actually Halloween Day. It was October 31st. We did this dual sport ride And we went out, and it was 34 degrees, which isn't bad. It's like 75 miles, or it was 95 miles, 34 degrees. But you're riding off road, so you're working up energy, and you're like,
sure,
you're hot before you know it. But
Absolutely.
the first 10 miles of it had a stretch of water where the water was like 3 feet deep, and we had to ride through that. So you spent the first 10 miles getting soaking wet, and then you're freezing your ass off, and then you get to go ride the rest of the day. So, yeah, I would say, just kicking things off, something I've done recently is ride through a 3-foot puddle for about a half a mile in 34-degree weather before riding all day. So that was not smart to do in cold weather.
Well, not smart or ambitious, whatever. Where's the line anymore?
How are the temperatures out there in Southern California? Has it been dropping below the 70 mark?
No, it's actually a beautiful day today. It's in the 70s, but it was like maybe low 60s in the morning the other day.
For those of you listening, we have regular video meetings with our West Coast team, and Zach usually shows up like an Eskimo. He like comes in, and I'm like, how cold is it out there? And he's wearing like a sweatshirt and a parka and a hood, and he's like huddled down. He's got a hot cup of cocoa, and he's just sipping away at it. Like
I love that you can paint the picture, but to say that I own a parka is hilarious. Why would I? So that it's a lie.
No, because
I do show up to meetings with a hooded sweatshirt on. A hooded sweatshirt is the maximum amount of clothing that I ever wear to a meeting, just so everyone knows. Anything else is complete fabrication.
Because when you came to Philadelphia, actually that's not true. When you guys came to Philadelphia to interview, you guys were like all freezing. We took Zach and Ari and Spencer out for dinner, and it was like 20 degrees out, and like we're all like wearing our winter caps and our jackets, and they're all in like light ski jackets, like just freezing, being like, we don't have any clothes for this.
Look, I remember what it's like to be cold. Yeah, I was wearing my Revit underlayer, that Revit, what's it called? Revit lunar jacket, I think, something like that.
But it was like a mid layer that you're supposed to wear in the
fall,
and you're wearing it as your winter jacket in Philadelphia in January.
Yeah. Well, anywho, are you still riding on the street these days?
Yeah. So like I mean, I don't winterize my bikes because I typically find that like within a 2 or 3 week period, even in the midst of winter, we can still find a day where it's like low 40s. And honestly, with like so much modern, comfortable gear out there today, like you can ride in the low 40s pretty comfortably. So it really doesn't stop me from riding throughout the winter out here. Now, I know there's a lot of people. I have a buddy I grew up with riding, and anytime literally even here it drops below 75 degrees, and he's like, I'm done for the year. Bike gets put away in September, and he doesn't get it back out again until May. But I think that's really, for the audience out there, when Zach and I were first talking about this, it was like, it wasn't, hey, do we ride throughout the winter with our heated gear on and all this? It's, what are some of the dumbest situations that we've gotten ourselves into while riding, especially when we were just starting out? Because much like some of our listeners out there, we learned how to ride without having all of the gear right at our fingertips.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the point of that is to share some stories that we have of ridiculous situations that we've found ourselves in, or stories that we've heard over the years, to give a little bit better context to riding in bad weather. Because for some people, like your friend, it'll be 55 degrees and they'll just think like, well, it's over. Like I'm not, all I have is a mesh jacket and perforated gloves, and like I'm freezing when it's 55 degrees out, so I'm just never riding. And other people might think, I'm never going to stop riding. And somewhere in the middle is probably the appropriate response, or where most people would fall, but they just wouldn't understand what is acceptable and what isn't. So really quick, you talked about when we started out, and I am from New England. I'm from Vermont, is where I grew up, and I took the bus to school, as so many kids do. The bus stop was maybe 3/4 of a mile or a mile from my house, and it was a dirt road, very rural. And our driveway was pretty steep in places and kind of crummy. What my dad did, I had a Honda XR80 as my motorcycle when I was 10 years old, and he put sheetrock screws into sheet metal screws they have like a little head, so you bury the screw into the knob, and then the head of the screw sticks up and it creates a little studded tire. And I would ride my XR80 down the driveway that was like just plowed and snowy and icy, and I would park it at the bottom, and I would get on the bus and I'd go to school, and I'd come back and I would start the bike up and ride back up the the hill to home. So like for me, that was pretty normal.
You were ice racing. You were ice racing before you realized that it was an actual thing you could go out and do competitively.
I was ice racing in my own mind. Yeah. So when it came time to actually, I experimented with ice racing later on when I was older, and I was like, oh yeah, this is basically the same thing my dad did, just like thread some screws into the knobs and
because I saw you did a video on that, right? Where you ice raced out where in like the Midwest somewhere? Didn't you do like an ice racing thing?
Outside of Milwaukee, yeah, I raced a Kawasaki KX250F with my former colleague Aaron Frank at Motorcyclist Magazine. Yeah, we did an endurance ice race. It was like a 3-hour endurance race on ice, which
were you
wicked.
Cold or were you comfortable? What kind of gear do you wear for something like that?
I was cold. I wore Climb Adventure gear, I think, and then obviously I like layered up underneath. But that actually brings up an interesting point. I was cold, and the reason I was cold was that it was unseasonably warm the day that the ice race took place, which meant there were puddles. So that it wasn't warm enough to melt the ice and have any concern about people falling through because it had been cold for 3 months at that point. So the ice was super thick, but there were puddles on the track. And so you're getting splashed with literal ice water. And if it's warm enough that you can get wet, you can actually be colder than if it's too cold for water to melt. Agreed?
Oh, so absolutely. I think that's one of the things to touch on here, whether it's an educational experience for some of the new riders that are listening, or it's just to commiserate with some of the vets among us that have been doing this for a while. But I know that I was on a trip once with Lance or not with Lance. I'm sorry. I was on a trip with my dad. And no,
but Lance is a father figure to you, so
Lance is like a grandfather figure to me. But no, Lance actually does come into this story in just a minute. But I was on a trip with my dad, and it was supposed to be like 75 degrees. It was fall. It was really nice out. So I wore like a 2-piece perforated Revit race suit. I have this old 2-piece Revit race suit that I wear on so many it's like my favorite piece of gear, and it's gotten me in trouble from a either too hot or too cold situation in the past. But I got caught in the rain, and it was like 60 degrees out, but I was riding in the rain without any rain gear with me, and it was a miserable trip because I was freezing the whole time. And I remember I got back, and Lance was like, don't you work for a gear company? Like, you decided to take this trip in the fall in a perforated 2-piece race suit? Like, that's not really smart. But to your point, a little bit of rain in a 60-degree day is a lot colder than wearing the right gear in a dry 40-degree day.
100%. Yeah, I've played soccer my whole life, and I've always said I like ideal soccer conditions for me, like maybe 55 degrees or 65 and raining, because that's how you if it's gonna be warmer, then I want it to be raining because then it'll be colder. And it's a good thing on the topic of gear to bring up, honestly, because doing an ice race when it's a little bit warm and you're getting splashed with ice water is that was bad, and it would have been better if it was colder. But in general, if you're riding on the street, it's obviously not better if it's colder. Point of all this being, what Spurgeon could have done, and what I often did before I worked in the motorcycle industry when I was a sort of an early days street rider, I would whatever jacket I had, I would just have a tight fitting kind of rubberized rain slicker that I could deploy at any point.
I don't think I've heard that term since I was like reading the Hardy Boys novels as a child. I was wearing a rain slicker, and I went out to my boat, the Sleuth, and my brother and I got in it, and we went and we caught the criminals. They were over on Skull Island. The island sounds spooky, and there was an old man who lived. He was a hermit, and I was wearing my rain slicker, so the moisture, as it just wicked off of me as I was on my boat, the Sleuth, kept me dry in my slicker.
Oh, are you done? Sorry, keep going if you want.
Sorry. So you kept a rain slicker with you to wear over your jacket, is what you're saying.
And I still do that now, because if you're riding on it, it's going to be hot out. If you're going to leave in the morning and it's going to be cool and you have a super perforated jacket, I just throw on that layer. And it works as a windstop layer or keeps water off you. But it's a great way to keep warm when it's cool if you don't otherwise have the gear for it, and be prepared. And a garment like that will pack down really, really small, so you can tuck it in your backpack.
I was coming across. So have you ever done the loneliest road, Highway 50?
50, yeah.
So I was coming back from a cross country trip, and I was trying to do an iron butt ride from Boulder, Colorado to Truckee, California, and it was maybe like early September, late August, early September. And I was, again, wearing my two-piece Revit perforated suit, which I've actually had this outfit for like 15 years at this point. And I was coming back on a Triumph Bonneville, and I got right to like halfway across Route 50 in Nevada. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was freezing. The temperature had plummeted to like 40 degrees. And to your point, I remember getting my rain suit out and like putting my entire rain suit on just to try and block any kind of wind.
Totally.
Anything. At that point, you're willing to do anything because you have to keep going. I'm trying to do this whole iron butt thing. So you're watching the clock tick down. And I was like, well, I'll put a rain suit on. And it wasn't because it was raining. It was because I was trying to use it as a wind blocking layer.
100%. Yeah, the road cyclists will know the trick of, carrying a newspaper up the climb, right? So you pedal up and up and up for 45 minutes or an hour or something like that. And then when you come back down, you take a couple sheets of newspaper and you put it under the jersey to just block the wind as you go downhill so that you don't freeze in all the sweat that you've just accumulated.
Well,
so yeah.
I do think it's interesting though, because a lot of people will comment in and they're like, oh, well, what do you wear for this or what do you wear for that? And while I know the right stuff to wear, especially now that I'm in the industry and we work for RevZilla, I do think that there are still times like that trip with my dad, which was 2 or 3 years ago, where I'm still in the gas station trying to find a garbage bag to put over top of myself to stop the water from coming through. So even though I know better, it doesn't mean I always have the right tools with me for the job.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's also really hard sometimes, especially on a longer trip, to pack all the right things. You just have to be kind of adaptable. And anyone who's ridden on a motorcycle that has a ambient air temp readout on the dash that's just showing the temperature. Sometimes you'll be riding along, it'll be 73 degrees and you're like, oh, this is nice. And then all of a sudden you go through this little pocket of air and you're like, holy crap, it's so cold. And then it'll show that it just went down.
You can feel it like that.
Oh yeah. But it'll show on the dash, right? It'll go down to like 71. Like it only goes down a couple degrees, or it goes down to 68 or something. And you think like, that was 5 degrees? No way. Like it was so cold. So you really feel that stuff a lot more on a motorcycle. And it's good to keep that in mind when you're, preparing to ride in whatever condition you are, because a little bit of preparation can go a long way for being comfortable.
What's the one piece of gear for cold weather specifically that is your first go-to? Like I know some people it's like, oh, I want a heated vest, or other people want heated grips, for example. What's your one piece of gear? And that's really where I'd like to start this particular part of the conversation.
Yeah. Heated stuff is great. There's no two ways about that. Heated grips are great. Heated vest is great. I'm going to go a little bit, I feel like off kilter with my response. A Pinlock visor.
Interesting.
I love not having to worry about the visor fogging up. I just think that is such a useful piece of kit, because they're not super expensive. Sometimes, like with some helmets like Shoei's, oftentimes they just come with a Pinlock, depending on the helmet model. But I just think that's an awesome piece of kit for a couple of reasons. One, when it's cool, you can keep your visor shut, and the visor won't fog. For me, one of the big things is when it's raining, you shut the visor and seal it, and then you can leave it sealed even if you're at a stoplight or you're going really slow. And in those situations, if you did not have a Pinlock, you would often crack the visor open so that it can breathe. When you do that, water then gets on the inside of the visor. And at that point, it doesn't matter how fast you go, it's not going to blow off because it's on the inside of the visor, and you have water on both sides, and it's kind of a pain in the tail. So I feel like the Pinlock has just these like sort of compounding victories in cool or rainy weather.
So for those of you out there that are listening that maybe you haven't heard of this technology before,
yes.
If you're looking at what a Pinlock is, it's actually a it's like a sealed insert that actually goes inside the face shield on your motorcycle. So what manufacturers have are they have pin lock ready face shields, and those face shields themselves do not have pin lock, but you can put an insert in there, and then they become basically fog proof. And while there's people that have tried to use like Rain-X and other different
toothpaste,
to like make sure that it doesn't fog up. So I've seen people like spitting in it and like trying to like wipe spit.
Totally.
Like the best solution if you're having a problem with your face shield fogging up in cold weather is pin lock. It's a little insert, and it does a miracle job of making sure that you can see through your face shield even in cold weather.
Yeah, it's a great little piece of kit. So I'll throw the same question at you. What's your go-to piece of kit or gear or something like that you would want?
This is actually this was a comment that came in from Moto ADVer, and this was from a Common Tread article, the 10 tips for winter riding. And he actually responded, heated grips and gloves are amazing. I recommend both. But I will be here to tell you, you'll be shocked with what a difference a cheap pair of hand mitts for your bike will do if you're riding on a budget. So for me, it's my hands, right? So cold weather, whether you're going Moto ADVer with like a pair of hand mitts, I think that heated grips is something that when I had my Tiger, my 2015 Tiger 800 had the heated grips that were factory on there.
Yep.
And I didn't realize that I needed heated grips until I had that bike. And then when I got my 1090 didn't have heated grips, and I was like, oh, I'll be fine. I can go back to not having heated grips. I'm not that soft, and I am that soft because being able to have heated grips just makes the difference in the world. If you don't have heated gloves, heated grips just helps so much with like comfort. It's the first thing that gets cold is your hands, and they start cramping up, and it's just miserable. So I think heated grips or heated gloves is like a must-have if you are going to ride regularly and you want to be comfortable in cold weather.
Yeah, absolutely. Heated grips are excellent. I mean, my personal bike is a 2006 KTM 950 Supermoto. It does not have ABS. It does not have fuel injection. It does not have traction control. It does not have a tachometer. It does not have a fuel gauge. It does not have so many things. But my dad gifted me a set of those little heating element pads that you can put underneath the grips on your bike. So you take your grips off, you lay these little elements on there, and you put the grips back over them, and then you run it to your battery, and there's a switch. So it's a really simple system. I mean, they're very, very cheap, but it's the sort of one add-on that I have on my bike. And as Spurgeon pointed out, I'm a softie who lives in California, but still, if I ride it's in the high 40s or low 50s, I love just switching on the heated grips. It's so nice.
Well, we have, there's a guy on our team, his name is Pat McHugh, and Pat's in charge. You've actually probably seen him in some of the product videos. He models for us sometimes, but Pat's in charge of helping us find a product for all of the different video reviews that we do. And his number one thing is he's like, man, it's going to be like 60 degrees. I have to get Zach like big, thick, warm weather gloves. His hands get very cold. And I'm like, really? He's
Did
like,
he say that?
He's like, I'm always making sure that I have like big, warm gloves for Zach because his hands are very tender.
Well, I will say, before I was a spoiled journalist who had many, many pairs of gloves, I often made it a point to have, if it's anything more than a half day ride, honestly, I bring 2 pairs of gloves. Basically always. I have a lighter pair that's maybe perforated, and then I bring a pair that my favorite type of glove to wear when it's cool or cold is an insulated glove that's waterproof, but a glove that is waterproof and lined but not insulated, because I don't like the thick the feeling of like really thick insulated gloves. And I find that a waterproof glove is oftentimes just, it's wind stop, and there's a nice bonded lining on the inside of the glove, and it helps keep your hands warm without like sort of screwing up the tactile feel of your hand on the bars. But yeah, I often bring 2 pairs of gloves on rides, and I rarely regret it.
Yeah, I'm very much the same way. For all of my street rides, I'm almost always putting an insulate. I don't like the insulated feel either, but that's why I bring 2 pairs of gloves. Where as soon as the temperature drops below a certain point, or it is raining, I'm like, you know what, I'll make the sacrifice and I'll go up to the insulated gloves. But like, for example, in the summertime, I have a pair of Revit Sand 3s that I wear, and it's just like a
great
mesh glove with a lot of armor and protection to it. But like people are like, well, what do you wear if it rains in the summer? And I'm like, I just wear that glove. If it's 85 degrees out and it's raining, I don't care if my hands get wet. So
as long as you've got your heated grips, right, Spurge?
Well, no, because in the summertime, I see what you did there. But no, in the summertime, like it's 80 degrees out, it doesn't really bother me. But in the winter, I am definitely a big proponent of what you're talking about with the waterproof gloves because, one, if it does begin to drizzle at all and you get even just a little bit wet, it's going to ruin. If it's a multi-day ride, especially, it's going to ruin it for you. But just having some of that insulation in there, even though I don't like the tactile feel, it's worth it for me to have that when the temperatures drop below a certain point.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. One other thing I'd like to point out is Moto ADVR. How did you say his name again?
Moto ADVR is how I said it.
Moto ADVR. He or she said, I'm here to tell you, you'll be shocked what a difference a cheap pair of hand mitts will make for your bike. I'm not sure if this is what they meant, but there's also, have you ever used like hippo hands?
Yeah.
The things that go, so they're these pieces of equipment that basically go around your entire handlebar and your entire control. It's basically just like a huge sock that you put your hand into so that you can feel the controls. And that means you can't see the blinker switch. You can't see any of your controls. You can't see any of the levers. Your hands just go into these little pods, but it completely blocks all of the wind and air movement around your hands when you're riding. And it can be really valuable.
So the one thing I want to throw out there too is we were talking about insulated gloves a minute ago. We were talking about heated grips. Keep in mind that if you have insulation on your palms, that actually blocks the heat from the heated grips to getting to your palm. So what you'll see with a lot of manufacturers is they'll have thicker insulation at the back of the hand to block the wind, and they'll have minimal to no insulation at the palm. That does two things. One, if you're running heated grips, it allows the heat to come and hit your palms and make you feel warm. And two, it goes back to what you're talking about. It helps with tactile grip. So just something to note.
A good insulated glove should have that. It should be at least much thinner on the inside of the glove than on the outside.
But before you start, this is a good point in the time to tell you to shut the up because we need to take a break and get a word from our sponsor in. All right, so we're back. Zach, you can now continue to talk. I will allow you
so much
permission to continue to speak.
Got to pay the bills around here. Well, we should. What I was going to say is we've been talking about cold weather and wet weather because those are the two things that motorcyclists really struggle with the most. But certain parts of the world, and certainly in the southern continental U.S., heat is also a thing that you have to battle, and that's a little bit easier situation to deal with because there isn't. It's rarely to the point of complete exhaustion and like completely ruining your ride. But you told me a story the other day that I thought was pretty hilarious, where you basically just had to hide from the heat.
So this is actually funny enough, back to my two-piece leather race suit from Revit.
That's what we should call this episode. This episode should be called
This piece of gear has gotten
perforated.
a lot of use in my closet. But I used to live in Southern California, much like Mr. Quartz does today. And I was in the process of moving to Tennessee at the time. So what I did was I rode my motorcycle back to my parents' house, and my dad actually rode down to Monroe, Louisiana. We met there. My dad rides too, and we decided to make like a road trip out of it. So the first half of the trip, and this was in July, by the way, or late June, I'm riding across Texas in a two-piece leather race suit. It's like 110 degrees on the other side, on like the eastern side of Dallas. And I pulled over to try and sleep, and it was like so hot. Like I stripped, I'm in my underwear, like laying in a tent in this campsite, and I'm still sweating. So I tried taking a shower. I'm like, you know what? I'm not even gonna sleep. I can't sleep. I'm gonna take a shower. So now I take a shower in this campsite. I come out. It's 110 degrees still. I'm sweating. I'm soaking wet. I can't dry off, and I'm trying to put on a two-piece leather race suit, and like it's not coming on, and I can't get dressed. So finally, like I didn't even bother putting the jacket on. I got the pants on enough, and I rode to a local McDonald's, and I bought like a sandwich, and then I crawled into like the back booth, and I slept for like 3 hours in a booth in a McDonald's, on the border of Texas and Louisiana, because there was air conditioning. So that was my relief from that trip. And again, I've done a lot. I've never let the wrong gear prohibit me from having a lot of fun on a motorcycle trip. I've never been like, well, I'd really like to take this trip, but I don't have the right gear for it. I usually just go.
Yeah, bite the bullet.
But that's one of those ones where it was like, this is my riding gear. My riding gear is this old Revit jacket, and I have the matching pants for it, and I'll be safe. And I'll tell you what, in 110 degrees, and then especially getting into Louisiana, where it was just like, it was so humid.
Yeah,
it was exhausting to the point of being dangerous. So I will say with heat,
Yeah.
same time was like shivering in the cold on a motorcycle can be dangerous. Like if you're riding in really hot temperatures in the wrong gear, like you get drowsy, you get sleepy, like it's hard.
The way that I've always thought about it is when you are cold on a motorcycle, your body will start to shut down. It'll start to, your fingers will go numb. Your limbs will, your muscles tighten up. They can't react as quickly. When it's hot, it's your brain that starts to shut down. It's your brain that starts to get exhausted. And both of those things are equally dangerous, really, or can be. So those are the things to try to keep in mind when you're riding in the heat, to try to keep your body cool enough that your mind is sharp. And when you're riding in the cold, try and keep your body warm enough that it can react to whatever your brain is telling it to do.
Do you have any example of like extreme hot that you've like, obviously like you've been in so many different situations, even on the racetrack. Like, has there ever been a situation where you're out there and you're in full leathers and you're ripping around a racetrack and like you can start to be like, you know what, I'm not as sharp as I should be?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean the racetrack's a good example, right? Because it's super high wattage. It's like high output. You spend a lot of energy in a short period of time, and you sweat, and then you come in and you stop, and then you're not moving, and then you sweat more. It can be really hard to stay hydrated at a racetrack, and the amount of focus it takes to ride a super bike at a racetrack can be, it's already taxing. So if you lose a little bit of an edge, then yeah, it's a problem. My one extreme story with heat though was I rode a BMW F800 GS Adventure from Utah back to Los Angeles, and I was going through sort of southern Utah and Nevada, and it was unseasonably warm, and I was just watching the ambient temp on the dash of the BMW go up. And you know how BMWs they calculate the thermometer reads in Celsius, and then it just calculates to Fahrenheit. So they're always really odd numbers. Like it goes from 72.3 to 72.9 to 73.4. Like it's these numbers that don't make any sense. And it was especially odd when I was riding along, and it was 115 or 116. And I didn't have a Camelback. So I had to stop. I was planning my stops really strategically, so that I would just stop and drink as much water as I could and then start going again, because the air moving over my body was all that was keeping me comfortable. And yeah, I remember I was hoping to, at that point, I was just hoping that it would go as high as possible, because this would be my story for the rest of time. And it got to 119.6, I think. And that was actually in full climb adventure gear, on a GS Adventure, which is like pretty good wind protection. So you'd think it would have been really, really terrible. And I think I was aware of how dangerous it could have been, so I was trying to be careful. But it was remarkable how well that gear worked. And I was lucky because it was that sort of like powder silver and white colorway that they had for a while. So I think I was lucky because I didn't get cooked in the sun, because it was a light colorway on that gear.
Well, I think it's interesting because they talk about like Gore-Tex, right? And they're like, oh, it's breathable. And I do think that there is a point of like, hey, it's breathable, but like if you're wearing a full Gore-Tex outfit and you're really sweating underneath, like it's not going to be that breathable.
No, it's true. Venting on jackets is really what makes a big difference when it's hot out. And I would just encourage people to remember, whenever possible, to try to see that coming before it happens. Like if you feel like it's really hot, try to just be ahead of the hydration curve and that kind of thing. One other thing I wanted to mention, actually, that we technique that we use in Southern California pretty often, because we're often sad that we have to wear so much gear. We do it because, as the old saying goes, you'd rather sweat than bleed, right? So like if you crash when it's hot out, it's nice to be wearing a jacket.
Unless you're a masochist, but yeah, for most people.
We won't get into that. But even in like a fully perforated like mesh jacket and jeans and perforated boots and perforated gloves and all that jazz, it's just too freaking hot to be wearing all that stuff in LA or where we are in the Southwest. So what Ari and I and Spencer often do is soak a buff. So you have like a thin neck warmer that you normally use for keeping wind off your neck. Just like soak it, dunk it in water every gas station you get to, or whatever, ice water if you can, and then put it around your neck. And as you ride, it just cools the sort of the bottom of your head, and it cools your neck, and it makes a huge difference.
Well, I think it's interesting because like one of the questions that we used to always get at RevZilla is like, I'm wearing this mesh jacket, but I'm still really hot. Well, mesh only works if you're moving. If you're sitting in traffic and you're not moving, the air is not passing through. So like mesh is a great alternative, but you still need to be moving for it to work. And what I used to do, and they have much more sophisticated methods of doing this. Like Revit actually makes like a cooling vest that you soak in water and it holds the water in, and you put that under your jacket.
Yep.
And it does what you're talking about with the buff.
Yep.
I used to just do it with a regular t-shirt. Like,
yeah,
riding across the Southwest, like I remember trips out of the Grand Canyon where it was like 105 degrees, and I would pull over to a gas station, go into like the bathroom, soak my t-shirt in the water, put it on, put my mesh jacket over top of that, ride, and you'd get 50 miles on the road, your t-shirt would be bone dry. So you'd pull over to another gas station, you'd soak it in water, and you put it on, and you keep riding. And it's again, it's not fancy, but it does the job, and it helps to keep you cool. Because once you're riding, all that wind that's pushing through it, that water acts with it, and it does help to keep you cool.
The first like quarter mile or half mile after you do that, it's always the best. When you pull out of the gas station and your t-shirt or your buff is and you're just like, oh, finally. So
flip the script now. Let's go. I want to know
craziest cold weather.
It's cold out right now. I don't care if you're living in Australia and you're like, hey mate, this is beautiful weather out here. I'm not agreeing with your podcast.
Yikes. Spurgeon's doing accents now.
We are not Rennie Skaysbrook. We are living in the US of A, where it's freezing outside for most of us at the moment, present company excluded. Although I'm sure that you're going to head home for the holidays and visit family in the great Northeast.
Maybe not with this whole virus thing, but yeah, I take your point.
Let's pretend that you are, and you'll
experience
the cold. My question for you is, what is the craziest situation that you've ever found yourself in with like an extreme weather event?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've done ice racing. That was pretty wild. We didn't really talk about wind, but that's kind of like, it's a tough thing to talk about as far as like advice and what to do. Really, it's just like, it's your own judgment. If the wind gets too crazy, don't ride anymore, because it can be really dangerous. But I remember riding across Death Valley, and the crosswind was so gnarly that you could see the person in front of me probably had like 20 degrees of lean angle. They're just like, you're just leaning into the wind as you ride, and it's really disconcerting. But yeah, the story that comes to mind actually about cold weather riding was an episode of Throttle Out we did when Ari and I were making Throttle Out for Motrend. We did this episode where we rode up to a snowy mountain in Washington State, and we try to meet up with these people who every year in January, I think, like President's Day weekend or whatever it is, they meet up and they do a snow bike ride. They do a ride into the, and the weather was pretty crummy. We were riding over this pass in these sort of low mountains, and it started to sleet, and then it started to snow, and we had to get over to get to the place where we were staying on the other side. But as we climbed, the snow got thicker and thicker and thicker, and it was night. The sun had gone down a couple hours ago, and we had the situation of like, when do we turn around? And at a certain point,
what kind of gear did you have on?
Yeah, so we were sort of prepared. Not really. I was wearing supposedly waterproof jeans, which.
So it's snowing out, and you're in a pair of blue jeans, basically.
Yeah. Well, they're like whatever, many hundreds of dollars worth of blue jeans that are supposed to keep water out, which was not the right gear to be in. But we were dressed for this episode of like, forging ahead into the snow while not wearing $1,500 in gear. That was the whole idea. So I was wearing waterproof boots and jeans and like an adventure style jacket. The bike I was on was an old KLR that we bought for $1,900. It did have heated grips, actually. Ari did not have heated grips. But what ended up happening was the snow got so thick that it was hard for the bikes to make it up this hill. And at that point, you're getting to the point where it's dangerous to ride the machine on the road, because you could just fall down.
You're sliding all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. You're sliding all over the place. And like snow and ice and sleet is a really bad place for motorcycle tires to be.
And your dad wasn't there to screw screws in for you to help you out.
I didn't have Daddy-O there. We actually did bring sheet metal screws for later in the episode, but we weren't ready to do it then. Anyway, so for a while, it's actually pretty fun because we're going like 20 miles an hour up this mountain pass and we're sliding around in these bikes and we're like, this is a little, but like, are we going to make it? Seriously? Like, are we going to make it to the hotel? That was one of the scariest situations I've been in because of what happened when I got off the motorcycle. So I was able to stay like mentally sharp and make it through that ride eventually. But what happened when I got to by the time we got to the hotel, we had gone down in elevation and it just turned to freezing rain, basically like sleet and freezing rain. So then I was just getting wet. When I got to the hotel and got off the motorcycle, I almost literally couldn't stand up. And I was laughing about it because I had made it to where I was going and like I wasn't at the point of sort of mental exhaustion, but I had to walk upstairs to get to the room, and Spencer had to help me get up. Like my quad muscle would not push my body up the stairs because it was just frozen. It was so cold. And to me, that was really indicative of how dangerous that situation was in retrospect. Like I was sort of like having fun with it by the end, but when you think about how taxed and how close my body was to shutting down and not being able to stand up, is like, that's what can happen. And that's an important thing to remember when you're in these situations.
Yeah. So I have a very similar story to that. What I would say is I would encourage anyone, if you want more information on Zach's little escapade that he was just talking about, there is actually a Common Tread article that Zach did on that. So a lot of times when we're doing the podcast, we like to throw to Common Tread articles. Zach actually wrote a really great article about his experience with that particular trip.
Right.
And it would definitely be worth, do you remember what it was called? Like,
I think it was called something about snow bikes. I don't know. I'm at a computer right now. Why don't I Google it? I want to hear your story. So I want to hear your crazy cold weather story. Another Common Tread story, or another escapade that actually started from a Common Tread story. This was one for you Common Tread readers out there. I had ridden a street triple. No, I'm sorry. It was a street twin from Georgia to MotoGP in Austin. I flew to Georgia to Triumph's American headquarters. I borrowed a street twin and I rode it to MotoGP in Austin, which is in April, I believe, like early to mid-April or late April or early May. So it was warm out. It was, Georgia was like 85 degrees. I was riding through like New Orleans. It was, 90 degrees and humid. So like I traveled light. I flew down to Georgia in a pair of riding jeans and like a leather jacket. And I had a couple of t-shirts with me, and I rode to MotoGP over like 3 days, 500 mile days, 300 to 500 mile days. It was the perfect trip to get to Austin. And I had a great time in Texas. MotoGP is always a blast. Then I had to get back to Philly on the bike in 2 days. So it ended up being like 2 850 to 900 mile days. Well, I left Austin in a thunderstorm, and I didn't have any rain gear with me. Actually, I think I had like no slickers.
I stopped and got like a frog tog throw over. Like I stopped at like a Walmart and got frog togs and threw those over. And
I'm pretty sure that qualifies as a slicker.
Yeah, it's a modern day slicker with a little frog on it. Well, those lasted for about because they weren't like the motorcycle special ones. They were ones for like going out and hiking, and they lasted for maybe 100 miles before they started tearing. And like your crotch is the first thing to rip, so your crotch is all wet. So I made it to Nashville that night, and I had friends in Nashville. So I was like, I'm just gonna make it to Nashville, and I'll warm up. Well, the temperature plummets. So I'm riding all day in the rain. Temperature drops to like maybe 40 degrees, and I'm not prepared for this at all. I'm in like jeans and a leather jacket.
You're in a Revit perforated two-piece suit.
It was actually a different one. It wasn't that Revit jacket, but that would have been a great, like, just bring it all together. So I get to Nashville. My buddy puts me up for the night, and it got to the point where like I almost pulled over. Like I was 30 miles from a free place to stay, and I'm like, I'm just gonna get a hotel because I can't do this. So I ended up making it to Nashville, and I went to bed immediately. I went in, I was like, hey man, thank you so much. I curled in the bed and I slept, and I only in that I didn't get there till like 1 o'clock in the morning. And the problem was I had to be back for work, not the next day, but the day after. So I had to wake up at like 7 o'clock a.m. My stuff hadn't fully dried because I'd only been there for like 5 hours. So I'm putting on my wet clothing. And then I had to ride from Nashville to Philly the next day, which is, if you've ever done that drive, for those of you on the East Coast, it's like a 13-hour drive. Well, the temperatures never came back up. So I put on my wet gear. I go outside. It's 40 degrees outside. It might have gotten up to 50 degrees that day. I rode until Maryland. And I got to Maryland, and by this point, the sun has gone down. Temperature starts dropping. And I'm like, I'm 3 hours from home. I'm going to make it. I'm not going to stop. Well, and then it starts to snow. So now I'm driving. I'm driving. I'm riding back. I hit like the end border between Maryland and Delaware. I'm freezing. I'm stopping at every rest stop that I can stop at. It's like 30 degrees outside. I'm still in like a damp leather jacket and damp riding jeans. And by the time I got back to the house, I rode to my girlfriend's house at the time, and I had to call her. Like I had to call her and be like, I need you to come out. And it was very similar to what you were talking about where Spencer was helping you up the stairs. I couldn't get my clothes off. I couldn't move. Like I was cramped up. She had to undo my jacket because like my fingers weren't working. And you realize in that situation, like it was dangerous. It took me, I didn't get home until 3 o'clock in the morning. At that point, I'd been riding from 7 a.m. to 3 o'clock in freezing temperatures. I'm exhausted mentally and physically. So there's a real danger associated with some of the stupid things that I've pushed myself through instead of saying, you know what, I'm just going to pay for $100 hotel room instead of riding the extra 4 hours tonight, Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a good thing to point out is that it's good to remember that it's probably smartest to do the thing that you don't want to do, which is, give up.
Well, I wish that I could say that we were smart enough that like once I did this, I learned the lesson. But like I rode through a hurricane once because I was like, well, I'm not going to stop. I mean, it's just a little bit of rain and drizzle. And then finally I did stop and get a hotel room because I'd been on this cross country trip and I was camping. And the only time that I got a hotel room was I finally was like, I was riding through this hurricane that came up through the Gulf and I was like, I'm going to get a room. But like I have a laundry list of like, I've just pushed my body through cold weather, through rain. And we should probably stop. And I would like to say that I'm smart enough now that I wouldn't do it again, but that's probably not the case.
Yeah, I know. So do as we advise, not as we maybe would do, basically. Yeah. Well, I have one more story that I'd like to share,
Did you figure out what the Common Tread title was for that article?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I looked it up. It is called "Conquering Winter on Craigslist Dual Sports." The ride to snow camp. So snow camp is the name of this.
So if you Google snow camp Common Tread, you should be able to find that article.
Yeah. If you look for snow camp, and Common Tread, you should be able to find it. And there's some cool pictures of how insanely snowy it was at the end of the day. But I have one more story that I'd like to share from a salty old motorcyclist that I've known for many, many years that I think will be a good segue into the end of this conversation. He told me, so he lives on Long Island. He, for years, commutes into New York City and then back out Long Island. And he does it year round, if everything's going okay. And being a salty old motorcyclist, he doesn't, if it's 40 degrees, he's not going to be like, it's too cold, I'm going to take the train or take the car or whatever. He just does it, So he rides in one day to New York City, to Brooklyn, spends the day at work, and then he said that the whole day the weather gets worse and worse and colder and colder. And then he said by the time he's riding home, it's below freezing and there's no precipitation anymore. But he's like, it's like this is not a great situation. And he has this great story about this is an old EX500, Kawasaki EX500 that he put like some ungodly number of miles on from commuting. But he's riding down Long Island Expressway, and he said he was just going dead straight, maybe 55, 60 miles an hour, 100% straight. And he said the front end just washed away. It just disappeared. He was just going completely straight, and all of a sudden the front just slid and slid and slid and slid, and then he was sliding down the road, and he just watched the bike spin down the breakdown lane and off into the shoulder. And as he told it, he's like, I just sort of trotted down the freeway and I picked it up and I smacked the headlight back into place and went to the grocery store. No big deal. Because he's a salty old motorcyclist. But the point is, it can feel like a reasonable time to ride. But the question that we wanted to end on was, when do you call it quits? When is it too much? When should you just say, no, I'm not doing it? And I feel like we've covered, exhaustion and wet and cold. But there are some times if there's going to be ice on the road, potentially, for me, that's a red flag. That's like it's really difficult to justify riding a motorcycle when there could be black ice or ice of any kind on the road.
I think for me, and this kind of goes back into the story I was just telling, if I'm already involved in a ride, I'll have a harder time admitting myself that it's time to pull over and not go out. It's like, no, I'm going to finish this, or I have to make it home, or whatever it is.
Yep.
But I think for me, the appropriate time to stop riding from a seasonality standpoint is I will ride all winter long, but I will not go out for a ride if there's already snow on the ground. I've done that. I did the thing when I was 18 or 20 years old, and I was working at a shop, and regardless of what time it was, I wanted to be on my motorcycle. So even if it was snowing, I'm like, I'm going to take the bike to work today, and then I'm the cool guy that rides in the snow. And I'm not that anymore. I've learned a long time ago that I'm not the cool guy, and I'm certainly not going to risk getting hurt by going out in a snowstorm at this point. So I think for me,
you're still a cool guy as far as I'm concerned, man.
I know, but you and I can only pat ourselves in the back so much, and then the rest of the comments keep it honest for us. Yep. So we'll start reviewing those comments, and they're like, that guy with the beard looks like he's not that cool. And I'm like, that's right. I haven't shaved recently, according to some of the comments from previous episodes. But
that's a good point. Yeah. Though. I think that's a good line in the sand to draw. I know, like, my dad also rides and lives in Vermont still, and he will occasionally go out on a nice warmish day in the middle of the winter when it's above freezing and the roads have been salted and then they've dried. So, even if it's cold, the roads are completely dry. You're like, well, probably not going to get in too much trouble. But those situations are, I think, few and far between. And it's good to definitely have something to tell yourself, well, I'm not going to do it if this is the situation because I don't feel comfortable.
I think that, the point to, what you're talking about with your dad too, is like, if you are going to ride in the wintertime, just turn the volume down to 8 instead of 10, because you're talking about salt. Like, if you're flying through a corner, even if you're really familiar with the backcountry road that's your favorite little place to go ride, if you're going around a corner in the fall and there's wet leaves in the ground or there's some salt, in January, and you hit that, the best traction control in the world isn't always going to be able to save your ass. So, like, I do think that, like, if you are going to ride year round, like a lot of us are forced to do, if we want to keep our hobby going, is to just, reel it in a little bit. And if you're planning on a 95-mile dual sport day in October and the first 10 miles of it has you riding through giant puddles of frozen water, maybe rethink that ride. Maybe just go around somehow.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good thing to end on is to try to limit your ambitions a little bit, because that can be a big piece of how you get yourself in trouble. If you just manage expectations and ambitions while you're headed out on a ride, then you're less likely to get into a situation that you will later regret.
Now, speaking of regret, let's move on to the final portion of the program, and we're going to highlight some people that probably regret writing in, because we're going to pick on you right now in the Highside, Lowside Readers' Questions segment of our podcast. And this is where we highlight questions and comments that our readers have either placed in the comment section on YouTube, or you have sent us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com.
And we... just to be, we do occasionally pick on people. But he's saying pick on in like sort of a friendly way. We're not gonna try and barbecue folks for asking questions. This is great. We love getting questions and comments on this kind of stuff because it gives us fodder. And oftentimes these questions are ones we wouldn't have thought of by ourselves.
I would say that if we're not picking on you, it means we don't like you.
Yeah, that's also fair. So first question is from Wedge. I feel like, do you think that's a Star Wars?
No,
reference?
I think that's his God-given name.
You think so?
That's Wedge McGaverick. I'm guessing that's his last name, McGaverick.
Well, I'm going to choose to think that it's a Star Wars reference. Do you know who Wedge is in Star Wars?
I don't watch Star Wars. Never. I watched the first one once.
You haven't seen? Oh my God.
I watched the one where Harrison Ford dies.
Come on. Hey, Spurge, you don't just jump right into that. That is like 40 years after the fact.
I like Harrison Ford.
So you never watched the original ones?
I watched the very first one.
The one that came out in like 1977 or whatever it was.
That one.
And you watched that and you didn't think, I'm curious what happens to Luke Skywalker next. I want to watch Empire Strikes Back. Are you serious?
I skipped ahead to the one where Harrison Ford died.
Stop saying Harrison Ford dies.
Harrison Ford dies. His son throws him off of a ledge.
No.
For those of you that haven't watched Star Wars, there's an episode of Star Wars where Harrison Ford gets thrown off of a ledge by his own son.
Lies. More lies. Han Solo can't die. Anyway. Wedge is a good friend of Luke Skywalker, and that's what I'm gonna.
I feel bad, and I'm yeah. So I guess the surprise is the cat's out of the bag. I am not a Star Wars fan, so let the comments fly on that one.
Yeah,
but keep going. So go ahead, Wedge.
I'm sure
Wedge
I'm gonna get
McGaverick.
cooked for being a Star Wars fan in the first place. Wedge says loves the podcast.
Well, this is from the "Do You Care Where Your Motorcycle Is Made" season 2, episode 2, and this was an email that was sent in.
Addressing the question, do you care where your motorcycle is made? Wedge says, loves the podcast. I do care where my bike is made, but ultimately end up buying the best machine. I currently own a 2015 Speed Triple, some other stuff too, blah, 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 Japanese bikes, Suzuki's. And he says, I have argued with my wife that I need to trade my Speed Triple for a new Tuono factory because the British were evil oppressors of the American colonist and poor Gandhi. But then she counters with some complete crap about World War II and Mussolini. I will let you know how that works out. Keep up the work and ride safe. So this is a pretty funny thing, I think. And the reason that I wanted this question, well, first I'm curious what you think, because you're a Triumph owner. They're warmongering oppressors, those British. So how do you feel about that?
We've all done some we're not proud of. That's the way that I look at this. If I judged everybody based on their historical past, there'd be a lot of finger pointing going on for all of us. So I'm inclined to not hold a motorcycle manufacturer accountable for the things that their country has done in the past. I mean, that would pretty much eliminate me from riding a BMW, Harley Davidson, an Indian. I mean, we could pretty much eliminate all motorcycle manufacturers for that their country has done in the past. Let's be honest.
Totally. Every country is crappy if you go back far enough. The one reason I wanted to address this, which I think is so interesting, is BMW's R18, right? Which is that big cruiser.
Yeah.
Basically, they made a Harley Softail, but it's a BMW with that big 1800cc.
The jugs hanging out the
boxer.
side like it's a hammerhead
Totally.
shark.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think, like, I grew up my dad's an airhead BMW guy, so like my history with BMW goes way back. I've ridden lots of old BMWs. So from aesthetically, I think it's a cool bike. Functionally, I think it's a terrible bike. The point is, I think it's so interesting that BMW has gone after the Harley crowd with this bike, right? And the Harley crowd is a very generally, if you're going to stereotype them, they're sort of like conservative, corn-fed Americans who are they like the value and the heritage that you get from a Harley Davidson, which is all totally true, right? Like Grandpappy came back from the war, he bought a Harley Davidson, so I want
and he's
a
got
Harley
a Craftsman toolbox to work on it. Yeah.
And honestly, that is not a bad reason to love a company. I mean, there's a lot to love about Harley Davidson. The heritage is very, very real. What I think is funny about it is that BMW took this aesthetic from 1930s Germany, and then they are selling that to people who buy Harley Davidsons because of the American heritage. And I know that it's a very loose connection, but I have this feeling of some guy looking at it and being like, this Nazi era aesthetic that has been pulled and drawn in to a modern BMW and then being sold to Americans who like Harleys. I just think that's hilarious.
I think you see that with a lot of manufacturers, right? Like we were talking about Triumph. Like a lot of the Triumphs now are made in Thailand, but yet they're still like they're throwing a British flag on there, and it's because the company is technically a British company. Then you have Royal Enfield. Royal Enfield was originally a British company, and now they're owned by an Indian manufacturer. So, but
Hiker.
they're still touting the whole British heritage with a lot of their stuff.
Right. Because it got popular again, right? It was India took over the manufacturing of Royal Enfields, and they make them, and then they became sort of like what's old is new again. It became popular, and then the British side of Royal Enfield was like, actually, we used to. That's like a British that we used to do that. That was back when we when we were shitheads, but that we used to make that bike. So like, why don't we take that back now?
The other part of this that I think is really interesting is, and the Triumph marketing team is going to hate me for saying this, but there is not a company out there that touts their relationship with Steve McQueen more than Triumph Motorcycle Company. Triumph motorcycles, I feel like Steve McQueen rode a vintage Triumph around once or twice, but if you read anything about like what he liked to race, he loved Husqvarna. And like those were like, once he discovered a Husky, he never went back to racing British twins when he had a nice single cylinder motorcycle that did the job. But I've never once seen a modern day Husky with like a Steve McQueen edition on like a 350 FE. Like that's the modern edition of what, like if Steve McQueen was alive today racing, that's the bike that he would be on. Not a Triumph Scrambler that weighs 520 pounds.
True.
Like,
not to mention, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that famous scene where Steve McQueen jumps the fence in The Great Escape? The idea was that he stole a German bike and escaped, right? Or was trying to escape when he made that jump over the barbed wire, which of course would have been like an R32
which would
BMW.
have you couldn't do it. So like
it was a bike
BMW made 20 years later by a British manufacturer that was supposed to be a German bike. Yeah.
None of it makes any sense. Fun fact. And I believe that was what happened with the stunt, right? The guy who did that stunt is Bud Ekins.
It was Bud Ekins, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah. It's sort of a famous guy in American motorcycling history, and he was basically like, I ain't trying to jump that thing. I got to jump this thing, and then that's the bike that ends up being the iconic thing, which in the plot of the movie doesn't necessarily make any sense. Anyway, the point is, Wedge, friend of Luke Skywalker, thank you so much for bringing up the point of where your bikes are made. I think that's an interesting conversation to have, and I hope that you end up with either a Speed Triple or a 210 Factory, whichever one you love more, and your conversation with your wife was just for education.
So we have one last comment that we want to hit on here. Actually, I'm sorry. We have two. This is a little bit heavy on the questions that are coming in today.
Do we need to? What else we got here? Which one do we want to do?
Do you only want to do one of the two? We can do that. But then it's either going to be, all right. Let's do this. We can do.
Let's do both, and then we'll edit out the crappy one.
No, let's do Kyle this time, and then we'll save it because Kyle's is actually about gear, and I feel like a lot of this episode was talking about gear. Right?
Yeah.
So yep. Kyle wrote an email in, and this was in regards to season 1, episode 9, all the gear, all the time, to be or not to be. And he says, hey guys, I'm a fairly new rider. I got into dirt biking 5 years ago and motorcycling 2 years ago. Your show is awesome. I just want to say that. He did say that the show is awesome. Just
totally
a quick call out here. If you think the show is
exist.
awesome, you should leave a review on Apple iTunes. We'll send you a free t-shirt if we pick your review. But anyway, that being said, he kind of goes through a bunch of different comments, here, but he gets to the question is, do you have opinions on how safety precautions are taught in motorcycle schools? Does an instructor harping about all the gear all the time bother you? Excellent show. Keep up the great work.
Right. And to be clear, just to add a little bit more context for Kyle's email, he said that when he went to the school, they showed pictures of like what happens to your skin if it hits asphalt at 60 miles an hour. And he felt that really impacted him. But he wants to know what we think. So carry on.
I mean, I think it's important for people to realize what happens if they don't wear the gear.
Yes.
I'm not telling you have to wear the gear. I'm not saying that I always wear the gear. However, I have broken a leg. I have gotten road rash, and I've also walked away from multiple crashes because I was wearing the right gear. I've crashed on a racetrack. I've crashed off road. I've crashed on the street. And actually, that's not true. No, I'm not technically
careful, man. What are you doing?
But yeah, okay. I'm not going to wood here. But like, I guess my point is that like I have no problem with an instructor at a school giving as much information as possible to help you make the right decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. There is no amount of information that you should seek out or that someone could tell you that I think is too much unless it's completely gratuitous. But I think the idea that someone who's new to motorcycling is shown or is somehow educated in what happens to your skin when it hits pavement, for example, is really valuable. I mean, it's easy to ride a bicycle around and then think, oh, I'm just going to get on the motorcycle. I'm just going to do this. And it's basically the same thing. It's easy to forget what it feels like. I mean, when was the last time any of you fell off a bicycle
at 15 miles an hour? 15.
Yeah, exactly. 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour, whatever. Or if you're running down the street, if you're running down the sidewalk at full sprint and then you just like tripped and fell. So you'd be going whatever, 10, 15 miles an hour.
5 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour. I mean,
well, it depends how fast you can run. I can run pretty fast. The point is,
you are a soccer star. I keep forgetting about that.
You really do. You can forget how much it hurts and how abrasive that material is against human skin. And to Spurgeon's point, no one should tell you how to live your life. Like you can do whatever you want to do. Just remember that it is extremely bad sometimes, even at very low speeds, to have your skin come in contact with a gravel road or pavement or even concrete. It's really not good. And the amount of times that the two of us would tell you that we've crashed in any situation on a racetrack, off-road, whatever, wearing a sort of medium amount of gear, just a normal amount of gear, not a crazy amount, and just you get up and you walk away. That feeling is like, it's so valuable. It's hard to put a price on not going to an ER because you never get the bill for not going to an ER, but man, is it worth it.
And you think about everything we've talked about in this episode, right? Like there's so many times where the gear makes the experience more comfortable. Yes, we talked about the summer months, and like there's times where, like, frankly, if you're riding in 110 degrees, I don't care if you're in a t-shirt. And Zach, to the point that you made earlier, like wearing the full gear actually made it more comfortable because it was blocking the wind, it was blocking that abrasion that comes with the desert heat. So not only is it safer for you, but a lot of times gear makes the event more comfortable to get on a motorcycle and go out and ride. And then should you tumble down the road by accident, you're safe.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the key point here. And I mean, I don't think that anyone's going to dispute that. If you're wearing a jacket, you're going to be better protected than wearing a t-shirt. Like the decision people make is like, it's just comfortable. It feels good to wear a t-shirt, and like I don't want to put something on over it. And yeah, that's totally fair. But I would certainly encourage anyone who isn't familiar with what happens to kind of look into it. And to answer Kyle's question, he basically said, do you have opinions on how safety precautions are taught in motorcycle schools? And I think that what Kyle's experience was a good one. Basically, the instructor said, look, this is what happens to skin when you crash. So you make the call.
Yeah, I mean, if your
totally
instructor
fair.
is showing up, at your local cafe with a row of motorcycles out front, and he's walking up to people unsolicited and being like, "You're a loser because you're not wearing, armored pants," then maybe that instructor has gone too far. But if you sign up for a riding school and what that person is trying to do is educate someone that might have no experience with riding whatsoever, they don't understand the dangers, I think it's absolutely imperative for that instructor to try and communicate as much as possible. What you do with that knowledge after you leave the school, that's up to you.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So I hope that helps Kyle, and I hope that helps other people as well. And of course, Kyle's comment/question does bring us to a lovely segue at the end of the show, which is to please comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a comment. If you're listening to the podcast, leave a comment. Again, Apple iTunes review really helps us out, and you could win a free t-shirt. Or if you are really motivated and especially literate, you could write us an email at Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. And we will feature your question, your comment, and you might win something.
Just another big congratulations. Speaking of you might win something, ProMark 5761.
Yeah.
Make sure you send in that email to highside, lowside at RevZilla.com. You will get your free Highside, Lowside t-shirt. So I just want to take a second and say thank you all for tuning in. Hopefully, if you are riding out there during the winter, you are staying nice and warm and protected, and you've got the appropriate gear to weather the winter months.
Indeed. And again, if you're listening in the Southern Hemisphere, I hope you're wearing your mesh jacket and you're staying cool. It's all part of the same battle, man. We're all trying to paddle in the same direction here.
I hate all of you. I'm tired of this cold weather. I'm ready to be moving back to Southern California. So.
But yes, if you're listening to it when this podcast came out, then it is likely around the holiday season. So we all hope you have a safe and happy holiday season, whether or not you're riding. And for Spurge, I'm Zach. Enjoy your season and your riding. We'll see you next time.